Greetings, everyone. A diplomatic bomb has just been detonated from Berlin, completely overturning all strategic calculations on the geopolitical chessboard and pushing the Kremlin into a dilemma. As the door to NATO narrows, Germany, under the leadership of Prime Minister Friedrich Merz, has launched a move to change the situation by proposing the creation of an unprecedented status in history. Today's video will provide an in-depth analysis of the following topics. A breakthrough in the secret room. How will Ukraine go from the hallway to Brussels' top negotiating table to help shape the sanctions crippling Russia's economy? Explaining Article 42.7. Why is the activation of the defense shield, a clause considered the NATO equivalent in the EU, a legal nightmare that could automatically drag the entire continent into a war against escalation? Giving a vaccine to the struggling economy. How will Central European budget integration plans help revive Ukraine's devastated regions? The smoke and fire of Popkov, the strategic impact of White Berlin's diplomatic push, and the Ukrainian army's decisive breakthrough on the front lines. Here is the content and detailed analysis. White Berlin issued an ultimatum, putting the bridge at risk of comprehensive loss. On the fiery geopolitical chessboard of conflict, White Berlin has just triggered a diplomatic bomb that has upended all of the Kremlin's calculations. For a long time, Germany has been one of the strongest bastions supporting Kyiv, with billions of euros in both military and civilian aid in the life-and-death struggle against Russian intervention. However, Germany's latest move has taken this relationship to a whole new level, marking a turning point for Ukraine's fate. A strategic letter sent to the top leaders of the European Union, including Ms. Ursula von der Leyen and Mr. Antonio Costa, has revealed a privilege that President Volodymyr Zelensky has longed for since the early days of the conflict, opening wide the door to join the European family. This is a bold diplomatic move that could reshape the global balance of power, significantly increasing Ukraine's influence while putting Moscow in a deeply passive position. However, behind that bold promise lies the harsh reality of pragmatic diplomacy. Observers believe that Ukraine's path to becoming an official member is still surrounded by countless legal obstacles and the complex political calculations involved in the ratification process by member states. The German leader himself also had to admit to this challenging reality, a truth that is not easy to accept for President Zelensky, who has continuously urged the West to establish a special process to fast-track the procedure right after the wave of Russian attacks began. From the very first days of the war, Ukraine immediately applied for membership, hoping to find a protective shield from the West. Although many European countries at that time expressed sympathy and supported an accelerated process, the power elite in Brussels always kept a cool head, constantly warning that a massive alliance cannot change its core structure overnight. After persistent diplomatic efforts, Ukraine was officially granted candidate status by the European Council, joining the ranks of Albania, Moldova, Serbia, and Turkey. But this Eastern European country's integration chapter is a long, patience-testing process marked by tragedy. It took nearly 2 years of waiting for official negotiations to begin, and another half a year for this process to truly get underway on the ground. Looking at the example of former Soviet Union member countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which have firmly established themselves within the European Union, Ukraine has even more motivation to pursue its ultimate goal. However, another political obstacle emerged when Hungary, under the leadership of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who was once considered a covert ally of the Kremlin in Europe, effectively froze Ukraine's negotiation process. Even though Viktor Orban later had to step down from the stage of power, the scars of division still remain. Many strategic forecasts indicate that this journey will take years, and the most likely milestone for Ukraine to officially join is 2030, provided that it can maintain a rigorous pace of reforms amid the rain of bombs and bullets. Facing a war of attrition with no end in sight, Ukraine cannot and does not want to continue enduring a hopeless waiting position. It is this deadlock that has driven strategic minds in Berlin to seek a breakthrough solution, an unprecedented shortcut in legal precedent. That is a bold political solution to bring Kyiv closer to the core institutions of the European Union immediately, granting Ukraine associate membership as an optimal, transitional agreement before achieving official member status. Notably, the concept of associate membership has never existed in any current regulations or legal frameworks of the bloc. Berlin is aiming to create an entirely new institution, a mechanism tailor-made for Ukraine's harsh reality, setting a precedent that could be applied to other countries in the future. The most important practical value of this position is that Ukraine will have a seat at the EU's top-secret negotiation tables, even though it does not yet have voting rights. In those life-and-death decision-making spaces, where major powers shape sanctions that strangle Russia's economy or coordinate flows of weapons and humanitarian aid, Kiev's voice will be heard directly. From energy policy, reconstruction budgets, post-war planning to global diplomatic strategies, Ukraine's leaders will no longer have to wait in the hallway while their allies decide their fate. War is always an insatiable machine that crushes finances. To defend every inch of land against the relentless pressure from Russian military attacks and to continuously develop countermeasure weapon systems, Kiev is having to spend enormous resources to the point of exhaustion. On top of that, the enormous bills from the destruction of towns, cities, and core infrastructure are pushing the war zones into a state of severe economic collapse. Amidst the situation where current loans and special aid packages from the West are only temporary painkillers, the plan of German Prime Minister Friedrich Merz opens a completely new chapter, gradually integrating into the Central European budget. This is a crucial turning point. Looking back at history, resources from this budget once performed a major transformation and miraculous revival for the economies of Poland, Romania, and the Baltic countries, turning their roads, ports, and infrastructure networks into prosperous lifelines. For a bleeding Ukraine, deep access to this capital flow is not only an invaluable resource for rebuilding bombed-out infrastructure and modernizing industries forgotten in the flames of war, but also a hammer to break the dependence on Soviet-era national systems, firmly linking its economic destiny to Europe's global supply chain to boost future GDP. However, economic value is just the tip of the geopolitical iceberg, because the real leverage lies in changing Ukraine's position from an outsider in the corridor to a player who takes control of the game. Imagine when the European Union debates whether to freeze or confiscate Russian assets. Instead of having to rely on slow and inefficient indirect diplomatic channels, Ukrainian officials can now directly enter the meeting room and thoroughly analyze the impact of those decisions on the situation on the battlefield, right during the discussion process. Currently, even though Ukraine has a vast network of allies on the old continent, it is still in the precarious situation of not being able to be present in the room where life and death decisions are made. Associate membership would immediately give Kiev an official seat at the most powerful negotiating table. This is not simply a short-term privilege. It is a harsh but invaluable real-world school that helps Ukrainian diplomats deeply understand and become familiar with the complex machinery and decision-making processes of Brussels before officially joining the European Common House, eliminating all obstacles and unfamiliarity in the future. However, the heaviest strategic card, which has the potential to completely change the situation and determine Ukraine's chances of victory, is in the German leaders' plan. It is granting this country the right to activate Article 42.7 of the Treaty on European Union on Mutual Assistance and Defense, which is considered the European version of a collective defense agreement of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. This clause firmly states that if a member state becomes the victim of an armed attack on its territory, all other members are obligated to support and assist by all means within their power. The key deterrent aspect of Article 42.7 lies in the fact that once this trigger is activated, the rescue process will be automatically initiated without the need for any lengthy discussions. The decision involves 2 procedural consensus votes in the European Council to support the country in distress. In the long run, this will be a solid security shield protecting the fate of Ukraine. In the face of threats, this is a direct and forceful warning message. They are no longer just confronting Ukraine alone on the battlefield, but are declaring war on the entire security structure of Europe. In reality, the countries of the European Union and non-EU allies like the United Kingdom have continuously supported Kiev since the very first shots were fired. But this move will elevate the conflict to a completely different chapter, turning voluntary assistance into a mandatory legal obligation. This binding does not mean that European armies will immediately cross the border and enter direct combat zones, because the agreement still respects each country's right to decide the form of aid they provide. Neutral countries like Ireland can focus on non-military support, logistics, intelligence, and economic aid. Meanwhile, countries with large defense budgets and capabilities, such as France and Germany, will supply everything from tanks and infantry vehicles to advanced air defense systems and modern ammunition. Although these activities are already taking place, Germany's proposal will significantly upgrade them. The Kremlin will now have to face an extremely difficult strategic dilemma, as any military escalation in Ukraine will be treated as a direct attack on the European Union itself, triggering an all-out response that Russia's war machine will struggle to withstand in the long run. In the heart of this war of attrition, President Volodymyr Zelensky has sent a strong message to the world dozens of times. Ukraine will never sign any peace agreement without absolute security guarantees. For Kyiv, the greatest fear is not the current sound of gunfire, but the scenario of a false peace, where President Vladimir Putin could use a few years of ceasefire to quietly recover, rebuild, and strengthen his armed forces before seeking a new way to launch another invasion. There was a time when Ukraine's leadership chose to place their trust in the protective shield called NATO. However, the harsh geopolitical reality is proving that this door is closing, especially as President Donald Trump of the United States continuously and firmly rejects the prospect of Ukraine joining this military alliance. In that context, joining the European Union has become the most practical and feasible lifeline. If Friedrich Merz's ambitious plan is approved, this former Soviet member state will immediately be treated as a de facto member much sooner than anyone predicted. This breakthrough move not only gives President Zelensky the much-needed confidence on the international stage, but also serves as an ultimatum to Moscow that any escalation will not be tolerated. It puts Ukraine in a stronger decisive position than ever before in future peace negotiations, creating a solid foundation for Kyiv to realize its ultimate aspiration, not only to end the fighting, but also to reclaim all occupied territories. The power of these security commitments does not stop at diplomatic documents, but also serves as a master key to revive Ukraine's economy from the ruins. Currently, even though Ukraine's domestic defense industry is witnessing astonishingly rapid development, international investors remain extremely hesitant and cautious. The fear of another sudden attack from Russia that could wipe out all economic achievements overnight always haunts foreign investment. However, once the shadow of a solid security framework backed by the European Union appears, along with a pledge of protection from member states, market concerns will be immediately alleviated. When confidence is restored, a wave of global financial corporations and businesses entering Ukraine will trigger the construction of numerous new factories and workshops. The inevitable result is the creation of millions of jobs, a skyrocketing GDP growth chart, and more importantly, it will be a sacred call urging millions of refugees scattered around the world to return home and write a new chapter in their lives after the war ends. This is not just a theoretical pie in the sky, because history has witnessed the miraculous and groundbreaking rise of Poland and the Baltic countries after joining the Central European Community, becoming magnets that attract global capital flows. However, high-level geopolitical games are never a free lunch, and Friedrich Merz's plan also comes with extremely harsh binding conditions. First is the introduction of an automatic reversal mechanism, a sword of Damocles hanging over Kyiv's head, allowing the European Union to immediately suspend or revoke Ukraine's associate membership if Ukraine shows signs of backtracking in the reform process or betraying the core values of the bloc. This forces Ukraine to constantly walk a tightrope, proving absolute loyalty to European rules and regulations if it doesn't want to be expelled without mercy. All current signals indicate Kyiv is heading in the right direction. Despite the chaos and severe difficulties of a country in total war, the European Commission still has to acknowledge that Ukraine has shown impressive capacity in implementing its reform commitments. Remarkable progress in the judicial system, the market economy, the fight against corruption, money laundering, and the protection of the rights of major minority groups are the tickets for both Ukraine's short-term plans and long-term aspirations. Another concern arises as analysts believe that associate membership could become a perfect excuse for Europe to delay or even avoid granting official membership status in the future. But Friedrich Merz and senior officials of the bloc have dispelled that skepticism with a firm statement that this is only a transitional solution, a strategic stepping stone to empower and benefit Ukraine in this life and death struggle, not a replacement for the official accession process. As Friedrich Merz wrote, "My proposal reflects the unique situation of Ukraine, a country engulfed in the flames of war. It will help promote and shape a peaceful solution through negotiations." He emphasized this vital importance for the security not only of Ukraine, but of the entire continent, and expressed his determination to realize this associated membership mechanism in the near future by discussing with European leaders to establish a dedicated task force. This initiative also extends support to the Balkan and Kosovo countries, even though they do not receive the associated membership privileges like Ukraine. Once again, Germany affirms its supreme leadership role in protecting the future of Europe. If Prime Minister Friedrich Merz's plan is approved, the connection between Brussels and Kyiv will be strengthened at an unprecedented level in history. This throws a series of new complex problems at President Vladimir Putin, and it could also be a new step leading to a ceasefire agreement. So, how do you evaluate this associate membership proposal? Will the EU agree? If Article 42.7 is actually triggered, will Russia back down and sign a withdrawal agreement?